Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Actually, Dr. Belk didn't want to tell off on our ages. Dr. Belk and I went to school with each other at Texas A&M, and we started doing the math on that, Keith. That was about 30 years ago, and that's hard to believe. But anyway, it's a great opportunity to come back to Colorado State. And before I came to Colorado State, or back to Colorado State, I worked for a company called PFG, Performance Food Group. They would be the second largest food distributor in the United States. And in that program, I had the opportunity to develop a branded beef program. And the picture you see now, those are some of the cattle. And you'll hear me refer to a program called Braveheart. That was the name of the branded beef program. People ask, well, what did it have to do with Braveheart? Where'd you come up with the name? I'm not for sure where we came up with the name Braveheart. That was the marketing people, and we were told not to worry about the marketing and the naming of that, just come up with the program. I'm sorry. There you go. Thanks, Keith. So again, let's talk a little bit about that program if we could. One of the things that Dr. Belk, and he certainly laid it out for me perfectly. If you're going to develop a branded beef program today, whether it be in Uruguay or United States, it has to involve and include more than just a high quality beef item. One of the things that we were very concentrated on is that not only did we sell a branded beef item that was delicious and high quality and consistent, but we wanted to sell the story behind it. And in fact, this happens to be a restaurant in Kansas City, Missouri. And the name of this restaurant is called Story. And everything in this restaurant, the waiter or the waitress, the table person could tell you exactly where it was from, how it was raised. They could completely tell you the story associated with all the items, whether you were talking about a piece of beef, a piece of fish, tomatoes, or even something like a bottle of wine. That's becoming more and more important. And you saw that in Dr. Belk's slides. Some of the people want to know how it was raised, where did it come from, was it humanely harvested? Those type of things need to be part of your story. So let's go ahead and talk about a story. I think this is something that you need to remember when you're coming up with a story. I'm a good storyteller. But, you know, a lot of people know that I probably like to stretch the truth a little bit to make it an even better story. But if you're going to tell a story, the things that are associated with that story being effective and being good, the story has to be pretty simple. It needs to be simple and easy to understand. Another thing, there has to be an emotional component to the story. When you're talking about something like beef, that emotional component has to be talking about Angus cattle, Hereford cattle, humanely harvested. In other words, things like that, the emotional part of it. You have to be truthful. You just don't tell a story. You have to be truthful, and you have to make sure that the audience believes that you're being truthful. That has to be part of the story as well. And lastly, good stories, you have firsthand experiences. And I'll show you an example of that. That was one of the reasons when I worked for PFG, we took customers, potential customers, as well as our salespeople. We took them to the feed yard. We took them to the ranch. We took them to the packing plant. We wanted them to have those firsthand experiences whenever they went out and sold the story of Braveheart. Braveheart had many things associated with it. We talk about the story. These are all like chapters of the story. For instance, we used a program called Progressive Beef. You can see it over here on the right. Progressive Beef was 43 items that we did at the feed yard, and whether it be animal welfare, the way cattle were raised, antibiotic usage, all of these things were audited by a third party. And I'm proud to say that 3 of the 5 people that started the Progressive Beef program have ties to Colorado State University. Obviously, the gentleman on the right in the purple shirt, that's Dr. Gary Smith. The young lady in the middle with the vest, that's Dr. Tipple Grandin. And then the young lady to the left with the purple shirt on, that's Dr. Lynn Delmore. Dr. Smith was involved with a lot of things from the meat science standpoint. Obviously, Temple was involved with animal handling and welfare. Dr. Delmore was involved with a lot of the food safety and plant things that we did, and we expected to be associated with the Braveheart program. So again, those are good people, and owe a lot to all of those people and what they've done here at Colorado State and for the beef industry, not just the U.S. beef industry, I should say. I think another thing you have to understand, this is my boss or former boss, Dr. Belk's my boss now, but that gentleman holding the box, his name is Steve Sands. And the people around him were people that fed cattle for the Braveheart program. These people loved being able to tell that story, that they were involved, that they weren't just cattle producers then anymore. They were food producers. And they loved being able to tell that story, and they took a lot of pride in that. And I should tell you, one of the things that we did in the Braveheart program is each week, these producers, whenever they produced cattle that met the Braveheart requirements, they received a check weekly from PFG, a premium for doing things the way we expected them to be done. And again, they enjoyed being part of the production system. And it was, we would have these meetings, 4 or 5 of them annually, bring them in. We would have a Braveheart steak dinner and virtually just sit there and answer questions and tell them how much we appreciated them helping out our company. Whenever I took the job 5 or 6 years ago at PFG, the CEO of PFG, he said, Dr. Morgan, I want you to go out and train our 3,300 salespeople across the country. And I want you to be Dr. Morgan, because that gives you some credibility. But he says, all I'm telling you is do not make this into a science fair. I'll never forget when George Holmes said that, because you have to remember the people, those 3,300 people that worked for PFG, they were responsible for selling about 11,000 different items. They were a broadline distributor. They sold mop buckets. They sold laundry detergent. They sold salt melt. They sold plates and dishes. But I'm here to tell you, if you go into one of these places, we would always lead with protein. And the reason we would lead with protein was because if you got the protein business in a restaurant per se, you would get all of the other business as well. So it was very important that they understood the Braveheart program and all of the things that went into the Braveheart program up and down the production system. I mentioned to you that we had to have good people. We had one group of people that fed all the cattle for us. We did not own cattle, but this group of people fed cattle for us. They knew what we expected. And this group of people is called the Beef Marketing Group, BMG. They're located in Kansas and Nebraska. And one of the things that they would do for us is they would feed about 6,000 cattle weekly for us. We would utilize about 4,000 of those cattle that met the Braveheart qualifications. All of the feed yards that we utilized within the BMG group, they were located within 150 miles of the packing plant, because one of the things that we wanted is we did not want these cattle to be hauled all over the country. We wanted them to have a short haul. It's not standing on a truck for a long period of time, and it worked out real well. And these feed yards, a lot of them were around Garden City, Kansas, or Dodge City, Kansas. So again, it worked out real well, and I'll share some additional information on that in just a second. I mentioned to you Progressive Beef, Dr. Smith, Dr. Grandin, and Dr. Delmore. Progressive Beef was probably a quality assurance program that was before its time. We wanted to make sure and concentrate on producing something that was safe. We wanted to make sure it was handled with humane standards. We wanted it to be sustainable. What does that mean? That means that one of the things that we wanted you to do at a feed yard is whenever you scraped the pens. We wanted that manure to go onto the cornfields right there by the feed yard. We wanted the corn to be grown. We wanted that corn to go ahead and go across the street to an ethanol plant. We wanted the distiller's grain to come back to the feed yard. And again, that was something that was required, believe it or not, in the Braveheart program. That was one of the sustainability things that we talked about. Those types of things are very important when you start talking to chefs or when you talk to customers, for instance, in Los Angeles, New York City, Dallas, Texas. And it's becoming more and more that way, even in places like, Fort Collins, Colorado. Again, people want to know what you're trying to do from an environmental standpoint. So that was part of the program as well. Here's the Progressive Beef Program. I mentioned to you those 45 items or so. You can see a lot of them here are under cattle care. This is some of the stuff that Dr. Grandin came up with. We had persuasion devices, in other words, hot shots, those types of things that could not be used to move cattle in a feed yard. What if there was a bull that came to the feed yard? We had a procedure that had to be done for that animal to be castrated. Tipping of the horns, or whether the cattle had to be branded, depending on which state they were in. So one of the things that made this program very unique is that you did 2 internal audits each year. And then we had a third party that would come in, and that person that came in just so happened was another CSU graduate, and her program would come in where your food comes from, and she would do the third party audits at each one of our feed yards. And it worked out very well. And what the beef marketing group did is that if we had 11 feed yards that were feeding cattle for us, whichever feed yard received the highest progressive beef score, that particular feed yard, those employees got the largest bonus that year within BMG. And then the one that got the second highest, they got the second highest bonus for those employees. So we incentivized them to do a nice job from a progressive beef auditing standpoint, and that worked out very well in this case. I think another thing that you need to understand is that Steve Sands, whenever we were developing this program, I should tell you that the beef marketing group, they feed cattle for Tyson. They're the largest feeder for Tyson. They provide them with anywhere from 16 to 19,000 cattle a week. The beef marketing group does. We would not get in the way of them doing business with Tyson. But what we would do, as you can see there, is that we would feed all those cattle on the Progressive Beef Program. We would collect a DNA sample, and I'll show you that in just a second, and that's the identigen. What we would do is that we would pay the producers for doing things a certain way, and we would also pay Tyson a per head fee. And in fact, we were already and have invested about $100 per carcass before we'd even sold a piece of meat in order to get things done the way we wanted them to get done. But we felt like it was worth it. What did we want Tyson to do? We wanted Tyson to collect the DNA sample for us at the plant. We wanted them to sort these carcasses a certain way for us. We wanted them to do it the first thing on Friday mornings. That's when our carcasses were fabricated. We wanted them to slow down the line speed about 20% so they could concentrate on trimming and sorting and bagging and putting things in the right box. So obviously that costs money, but it was a thing that we felt like it was worth it. And I think the numbers over time proved it. Dr. Belk showed how some of the consumption patterns were changing in the United States. At PFG, we would increase our commodity beef business about 1% to 1.5% per year. And while I was there in those 6 years, the Braveheart program, the one that we're talking about today, the least it ever increased annually was 16% annually. So, and honestly, this product was more expensive than certified Angus beef. But again, we felt like a lot of people liked the story associated with it, and it worked out real well. I think one of the things you need to also understand, and I'm by no means trying to say ours was better than somebody else's, but these are 4 black animals here, for example. And I'll tell you right now, 2 of these black animals they don't have any Angus whatsoever in them. Now, they would be qualified because they're predominantly black. They would be qualified for various branded beef programs in the United States. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to take a DNA sample, because on our box it said Black Angus beef, and we could verify that with this DNA sample. That was one of the things that we did with the DNA sample. Another thing we did with the DNA sample also is, anybody ever had a complaint about a steak from one of our carcasses? We asked our salesperson to get us a piece of meat, either cooked or raw, get it to us, and we would actually, within 2 days, we could determine maybe what had gone wrong. One of the things that we would do is we wanted to make sure that it was actually from one of our carcasses. The other thing that it did is it prevented customers out there talking about, we have Braveheart on our menu, and they were not buying Braveheart product. So in other words, it helped us keep track of the product even once it hit some consumer's plate. By the way, the 2 carcasses here that are Black Angus, that have Angus in them, are the 2 on the bottom. That one is on the bottom left with the green ear tag. It's 100% Angus. And then the one on the right happens to be about 83% Angus. The one on the top left with all the yellow tags in it, that's a limousine carcass. And the one on the top right, it's a really kind of it's kind of tricky. That is a beef builder limousine bull that was mated to a Jersey cow. So that's one of the dairy cross animals that's real popular today in the United States. The 2 animals on the top, though, would not be eligible for the Braveheart program. And again, the DNA helped us sort that out. So that's what the DNA sampling looked like. And it would take place we slaughtered animals on Monday and Tuesday, collect those during grading on Tuesday and Wednesday. And by the time Friday morning came around, we knew exactly which carcasses were eligible for the Braveheart program. I think another thing, too, that we were very cognizant of is we wanted to maintain carcass weight. The carcass on your left weighs 950 pounds. The carcass on your right weighs 550 pounds. The carcass in the middle weighs about 800 pounds. And that is an ideal carcass weight for the Braveheart program. We managed carcass weight. Why did we manage carcass weight? It's because those heavier weight carcasses, the ribeyes, the strip loins, are bigger. And if you've got a restaurant and you're wanting to make a 12-ounce portion, you were having to make something that was less than 1/2 inch thick. And then you would overcook it. And then it just had no, as the chefs say, it had no plate presence. In other words, it didn't stand up on the plate. So it was important for us to do that. We even went one step further. Eventually, not only did we want it to weigh less than 850 pounds, but we also wanted to have a ribeye that was 15 inches or less in size. So we would use the instrument grading. This one happened to be 12.98 square inches. We wanted to actually have a ribeye of less than 15 square inches. And we had to do a tremendous amount of training to our sales force on that, because now we only had ribeyes, and all the ribeyes were 15 inches and less. Before that, they were used to selling lightweight ribeyes and heavyweight ribeyes. Well, today, everything is 15 or less. Some of them weighed 12 pounds, some of them weighed 16 pounds, but they all had about the same size ribeye. They might have been a little bit longer, but again, it took a little bit of continuous education internally to try to make sure people understood that. I mentioned to you slowing down the line speed. That's one of the things that we required. It's one of the things that we paid for. And we would very seldom would we lose a cutting test against the competition, because we want things trimmed a certain way. We wanted the what we call the finger meat off of a ribeye on the backside, where you take off the back ribs. That was all removed. We wanted on the strip loin in that little saddle area, we wanted it trimmed out. We wanted our tenderloins trimmed a certain way. And that was one of the reasons why our product was more expensive than CAB. You could not sell our product based off of price. That was why, from an educational standpoint, we had to make sure our salespeople understood why our product was $1 more per pound. But they also needed to know, hey, let's do a cutting test and show you how you can get that $1 back pretty quickly just from a yield standpoint. So that was one of the things that was in our bucket also, was the yield portion of it. We also collected samples each week, and we would age them for 14 days, and we would shear them just to make sure that we were putting out a product that was very tender and consistent from a palatability standpoint. This product, all the Braveheart product, was aged for a minimum of 21 days. But we went ahead and did shear force on 14 days just to go ahead and try to challenge the product a little bit. As we collected more and more DNA samples, we could determine which cattle we wanted to go into the program, which feed yards that we wanted to contribute more cattle to the program. Part of that was based off of the tenderness data that we had, and we could go ahead and back that up to an animal basis based off of that DNA sample. So we did more than just look at Angus breeding in those cattle. So this is the story. Up and down the line, what are some of the factors? And it was a good feeder partner, Progressive Beef, DNA sample that you could Angus verify. That elephant, in other words, you'll hear people talk about elephant carcasses. In other words, we wanted lighter weight carcasses in the program. We wanted you to slow down the line speed and fabricate a certain way. We wanted to be able to offer multiple grades. We offered prime, upper choice, and regular choice. We wanted you to age for 21 days, and we did that before it was released from one of our warehouses. So everything that we've talked about today, that's the things that go into the story that's exclusive to that particular branded beef program. And we were very proud of that, and we would compare that to many of the other branded beef programs out there. And you can see source from Midwest. We actually had to put in there Midwest feed yards. We started feeding a few cattle in the state of Colorado. And it was amazing, Dr. Belk. The government got involved, and it took about 6 months to determine whether or not Colorado was a state that they would consider being Midwest. It was amazing. Cattle fed within 150 miles, Progressive Beef, that black-hided we were talking about, DNA traceback, Angus verified, third-party audits at the feed yards, ribeye areas that we talked about, maximum fat trim. Those are all the things that went into our program that we felt like if we managed it, back to the Deming philosophy that Dr. Belk talked about, if we measured it and managed it, it would help us create a more consistent product over time. Dr. Belk talked about the beef quality audit. This is a way that the United States has used, and many of the industry that sell beef in the United States, that's one of the beautiful things about the National Beef Quality Audit. We're not just collecting data, we're collecting data that people are looking at and seeing, this is my roadmap, this is some of the things that we need to focus on. Obviously, food safety, we talk about that as a given. Tenderness, we talked about weight and size, and that's we took care of that in that program with carcass weight and ribeye size. How they were raised, we did that with Progressive Beef and Dr. Grandin's involvement. So again, we used that National Beef Quality Audit as a roadmap on how we needed to try to improve the consistency of our branded beef program. I mentioned to you that we would take people for firsthand experiences. That gentleman on the left-hand side with the plaid shirt on, he owns a restaurant in Oklahoma City that's called Cattleman's Steakhouse. It's been there for about 100 years. It's had 5 or 6 presidents of the United States eat at it. It doesn't look like much. It's right there by the Oklahoma City stockyards. There's been a lot of cattle bought and sold within that restaurant probably, but they serve about 13,000 steaks per week. And we wanted to take David there, show him the program, and we got that business. Even though we weren't the cheapest product out there, he wanted to be able to tell that story. The other 2 pictures that you see, that happens to be people that are salespeople. The 2 gentlemen in that picture were from New York City area. We had a program, ever who sold the most Braveheart during a 3-month period of time. We would take you on a tour of the beef industry, and that's them at the feed yard. The gentleman on one of those people would sell about $400,000 worth of groceries per week. The other one would sell about $300,000 worth of groceries a week. And it was the first time. And one of the things we would do is I would meet them in Garden City, Kansas. I would fly them intentionally into Garden City, Kansas, and you ought to see them when they got off the airplane in Garden City, Kansas, because these people, for the most part, had never been out of that New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. They've learned a great deal, and they were able to go home and get a lot of the other salespeople excited about this, because we would offer this trip 2 or 3 times a year from somebody from the New York, New Jersey area. And so it's important to educate not only customers, but also salespeople. I mentioned to you that we would do our own little beef quality audit. And this is some of the data from the beef quality audit. And you can see here cattle that from the beef quality audit, some of them were hauled as few as 8 miles. Some of them were hauled as 870 miles. And our feed yards range 42 miles to 118 miles from the packing plant. And again, we felt that was important, especially, for instance, this time of year, whenever you may have a 60-degree day and a 20-degree night, fluctuation in temperature. That's hard on cattle. And then let's go ahead and put a little rain or some moisture on them, and then put them in a truck and haul them 870 miles. That's pretty tough, and no telling what it might do from a quality standpoint as well. Average carcass weights, as I mentioned to you, 821 pounds at Tyson, 816 pounds at Cargill. We started slaughtering a few cattle at Cargill in Dodge City, Kansas. So it works out real well. You can see the beef quality audit, roughly 40% of those carcasses weigh more than 900 pounds. Last week in the United States, the average weight was about 917 pounds. That's a pretty big animal. Realize that means half of them roughly probably weighed more than 917 pounds. So again, that's something that was important. Again, I appreciate the opportunity, Dr. Belk, to let me speak a little bit about a branded beef program. I appreciate and I'm excited about everything we have going on here at CSU. Once we get past the COVID, I look forward to coming down and visiting. And I should say, we've got some things going in Uruguay right now. Next week, we're actually auditing a couple of more plants, Uruguayan plants, that are selling to Costco in the United States. I've audited 2 of them so far, and I have to admit they were beautiful. And people do a fantastic job down there. So it was neat to see some of the inside of the plants in Uruguay. And again, we look forward to doing more and more business with you, research with you, and we really enjoy this collaboration that we have together. Thank you very much.